Hello, all. It's Monday, August 25th, 2025. I'm launching into episode number 99, so I've already begun to think a little bit about what I can do in terms of celebrating my 100th episode. If you have any suggestions, shoot me a message and I'll see what I can do. Um, we have this in about 10 days now. We have our first of a series of yarn retreats here in Leesburg. If you've been watching, you know that I'm doing different kinds of events for different fiber folks. I had a stitching retreat, going to do a yarn retreat, and after the first of the year, going to have something for weavers and spinners and felters and rug hookers. But anyway, with all the excitement coming up about the yarn retreat, I thought it might be a good day to talk about the legacy of yarn, where it comes from, what its origins are, and maybe say a little bit about what the modern world of yarn looks like. Now, there are many areas that I talk about in terms of fiber that I have 50 plus years of experience and all kinds of expertise and ideas. Yarn, at least as far as it refers to knitting and crocheting and tatting, are not my expertise. But certainly if you've got a yarn shop or a fiber shop, you're going to learn a lot about that stuff as you go along. And as far as my own history of working with fiber, the first thing I picked up was knitting. I've told the story before about how my sixth grade teacher could knit and talk at the same time. So I went home and took a couple pencils and learned how to knit. So I thought I'd delve a little bit into the origins of yarn and kind of talk a little bit about that, and also maybe share some of my excitement over some of the modern yarns that we have here in the shop and that you'll find in your local yarn shops and various places where you find resources. Yarn was developed over 10,000 years ago. It's pretty obvious when you think about it that the idea of twisting multiple fibers together to make something bigger, stronger, and warmer would be a good idea. If you had just little wisps and strips of things like wool or linen, which would have been some of the earliest fibers used, you would have very quickly decided that it would be helpful to you for those to be stronger. You could have used the strings from palm fronds if you lived in a southern climate. Pretty much anything that has strands in it would have been useful and would have been something you would have tried to figure out how to make stronger. From what we can tell from archaeological studies, the earliest yarns were spun just tying a bunch of ends to a rock or putting a rock on top of a bunch of ends and then twisting those fibers together to make a kind of a rope-like or yarn-like structure. And really, if you think about it, that's all yarn is. It's just various fibers that are twisted together. Certainly, the earliest evidence are that they would have used wool from sheep and perhaps other animals, alpaca in South America, tufts of whatever hair or fur would have been available. And the production of yarn on any large degree would have helped with the production of fabric, because then you could begin to think about ways of putting the yarn together, of weaving it. A little bit later, you have knitting and crochet techniques that are developed also. The other thing that this opened up on a worldwide scale was trade routes and the need for those who had wool and natural fibers to trade with those who did not have it, because obviously things like fibers and clothing were going to be something that were going to need to be used universally. After that initial idea of tying things to a rock or a heavy object, you begin to see the use of a very rudimentary spinning tool called a drop spindle. And this is an example of one here. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate it because I really don't know how to do it very well. But if you look at some videos, you'll see people using a drop spindle. So basically what they're doing is they're letting the weight of the spindle help them to twist the fibers and to create yarn. Also threads too, but for our purposes, thinking about larger stranded work, which would have made yarn. Of course, before you even get to creating yarn, you've got to do some things with the fibers themselves. Here's some wool. This was hand dyed by my friend Susan Cosette, and this is ready to be spun. So you could either take a drop spindle like I just showed you, or perhaps look at some kind of a spinning wheel. I've got some spinning wheels here, but I didn't want to drag them out this morning because I just didn't want to do it today. But maybe sometime I'll spend some time with the spinning group that meets here at the shop, and you can see the process of spinning. But this wool has already been dyed, it's already been cleaned and combed and prepared in long strands so that it would be useful. And of course, if you think about it, if you're trying to make yarn, the longer the pieces, the easier it's going to be to create fibers with them. I mentioned linen. I don't have any linen here, but these are bamboo strands that are dried and come from bamboo stalks. And again, these could be spun together and stranded and made to use for wool, or yarn, I mean. Wool, I have an abundance here in the shop. I've got all kinds of different blends of wool. This is actually alpaca, and I've got sheep's wool, merino being one of the more popular ones. I've got some wool mixed with silk here. Silk, of course, is a wonderful fiber and probably one of the stronger fibers, natural fibers that exist. And so you'll see mixtures of those. And then later in human history, of course, you see cotton coming into the picture. And the long strands of cotton and the ease of working that it provides you gives you all kinds of opportunities to make stranded string and eventually yarn with that. So it's, for most of human history, you're using natural fibers. You're creating thin or thick strands using various spinning methods. And of course, as I said, they had to be cleaned and combed before you got to that point. Now, a spinning wheel, like you've seen in the fairy tales, like you are probably familiar with watching where the wheel turns and you're taking these fibers like I just showed you, and you're using a foot pedal, and you're creating a mechanism where you can create yarn a lot more quickly, came into practice during the Middle Ages. And you know, if you think about the use of language surrounding spinning and yarn and all of those sort of things, and all the fairy tales and stories there are about spinning wheels, you can begin to imagine how important spinning was and how important yarn was in older cultures, before we had mechanism and before we had Walmart and all that sort of stuff. If you think about it, let's say you were going to create, I don't know, a blanket on your loom. You're going to weave a blanket. That process may take several days, but think about all the hundreds of hours it would take to create all of the yarn that you would need, cleaning, carding, spinning, all that sort of stuff, before you ever got to the process of weaving. So it might take 10 spinners using spinning wheels and other activities to create enough for somebody to make one blanket using a weaving process. Obviously, as humans have developed, they've tried to find faster and easier ways to do these kinds of things. And spinning wheels were used pretty exclusively up until we get into the 1700s. In 1764, the spinning jenny was invented. And it was a mechanized, it wasn't powered yet, it was a human power or whatever, but it was a way of turning more than one spindle at the same time, which would then at least speed up the amount of work one person could do using the spinning jenny. And then a spinning mule, the next step up in 1779, was where they put water power behind the spindles at a water mill or something like that, and then we're able to run it not any longer on human or beast power, but using water as a resource. And then, of course, when electricity is invented, you begin to see the huge mechanism which happens during the Industrial Revolution. And that's when things really change dramatically. You don't have individuals sitting in their homes cleaning and carding wool and cotton and things like that. You have huge quantities of these products going to mills where either steam power or eventually electricity will create thousands and thousands of yards of yarn. And then, of course, you're going to have mechanized looms, which are going to begin to create fabric that way. But I think it's always helpful to remember that of all the mechanized products and all the wonderful things that we see today, they all were done by hand at one point. And I think there's always going to be a segment of our population, who likes to go back to that handmade process. And that's kind of what my thought with this legacy of handmade objects is all about, is that we shouldn't lose touch of the process that it took down through human history for a piece of yarn like this to be created. Now, I'm fascinated here in the shop as I've gotten more and more into selling yarns and fostering knitting and crochet and tatting events here at the shop. I'm fascinated with the process, the modern processes of yarn. So I have a good bit of yarn here for sale in the shop, and of course I know you have wonderful places near you where you could probably go as well. This is some yarn I bought in New Mexico a few years ago. It's sheep's wool, and they call it Shuro. Navajos use this yarn, and they dyed it in all these wonderful, wonderful colors. And of course, this is what you'll see woven into the Navajo rugs that are so famous from that region, from the Pueblo and in the Navajo Indian traditions. We, of course, still can get really great stuff using wool. Here's some new Lucky Feet wool from Circulo that I just got in. This is 75% merino wool and 25% polyamide, which is not a natural source, I should say. And you'll often see mixtures in modern wools because it's going to make it easier for to use, and it'll make it more convenient to wash and care for as well. Cotton, of course, revolutionized the production of wool and later fabric. And I've got some wonderful Wonderland yarn here, which is 50% merino and 50% cotton. I didn't pull up any silk fibers this morning. I think usually when I get silk, it gets sold about as quickly as I bring it in. But if you look closely at labels on wool, if you're talking about natural fibers, you're going to see mixtures of silk and cotton and merino and other sheep wools and alpaca and other kinds of products like that. Now, I have some fun stuff here in the shop that's quite unique. This is made from sugar cane. The fibers that are basically left over after the sugar cane is pressed and the sugar comes out. This is Circulo again. This is a company that's based in Brazil but does a lot of distribution here in Florida. And I love the feel and the drape of this sugarcane fiber. And I can see where it would be a lot of fun to use and also to weave with. And then another product Circulo has recently come out with is an aloe vera yarn. Again, made from the byproducts of the aloe vera plant, but supposedly has some therapeutic value in terms of there being still some of the elements of the aloe vera that might be nice for your hands, and that also might be nice for products that you make from that. I showed you bamboo here a minute ago. I'm sure you can go down the line and find other natural products that have been made into yarn. And then, of course, the big revolution in yarn since World War II, since about World War II, I would say, is the production of synthetic yarns. This is 100% acrylic, and many of the products that we buy today use artificial products, man-made fibers and yarns, and there's a lot to that process. Nylon, the list goes on of all of the man-made kind of products you can talk about. They have their advantages, they have their disadvantages. I know some of my knitters and weavers just don't want to use the man-made products. They'd much rather stick to natural fibers. And of course, there's some reasons for that. Sometimes the man-made products are not as absorbent. So if you're making tea towels or you're doing some weaving where you want to create something that would be useful in the kitchen, for instance, you probably want to stick with cotton and such as that. But certainly the making and the mass production of man-made fibers has really changed and revolutionized both the cost and the production speed of various articles of clothing. So, I just think sometimes it's helpful when we look at something and we kind of take it for granted that we just ponder a little bit about what our ancestors might have had to go through in order to enjoy some of the same advantages we have today. I'm getting excited about having a group. At this point, it looks like we're going to have about 60 knitters, crocheters, and tatters gathered across the street at the church. We've got a trunk show with some amigurumi Japanese figures that are created, and I have some kits for those. We've got a master crocheter who's going to be there making all kinds of little products. My partner here in the shop, Beth Caulfield, is getting ready to do a knitting class on entrelac knitting, and of course she'll be a resource there. So it's going to be a fun day, and it's a good time of the year for us to begin to celebrate yarn as we head into the cooler months and maybe think about ways that we can use it in our lives. So certainly the legacy of yarn is an important part of the legacy of handmade objects. I hope you have a good week, and I hope the coming holiday weekend will be relaxing and calm, and I hope I'll see you back in about a week for my 100th episode. Take care.